This is Tech Scene Talks on Tour, the podcast about enterprise technology that brings you IT insights and analyses from events all around the globe. We cover everything, everywhere. Visit techzine.eu for more information, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast.
Welcome to this new episode of Tech Scene Talks on Tour. I'm Sander, and I'm at RSA conference this week. And I'm here with Alex Stamos. He's Chief Trust Officer at SentinelOne. Welcome to the show. I mean, not the RSA conference show, but this particular show.
Yeah, I'd much rather be here than at the actual RSA show. So thank you for giving me an excuse to escape.
That makes two of us. So that's good. So obviously, you being the Chief Trust Officer, we're going to talk about trust, which is a big topic.
Yeah.
But a very important one, especially in cybersecurity, but also when it relates to AI and you know everything that goes with that. Is trust? I mean, trust is an important part, right, for customers when they select a cybersecurity solution or whatever solution that they, especially from big tech and you know all these things. Or is it? Is it really important for customers to trust?
Well, it should be.
Yeah, but what's your experience from your conversations and from the market?
Yeah, I think companies are waking up to the number of organizations and projects and sometimes nonprofit developers and random anonymous people upon which their IT systems function. Mm-hmm. We've gone through the last 10 years a real shift to the cloud. And at the beginning of this, I just remember, I'm old enough to be in this industry. As my friend Dino DeZavi said, I'm old enough to remember 2 Microsoft trustworthy computing memos, right? So it's like how we're marking out the time. Yeah. Every 20 years, Microsoft has to write a memo.
Yeah.
The move to the cloud was a big deal, right? Because the way people understood I want to trust something is you have ship software, you put on a device that you control and a data center you control. You're able to control the perimeter. Therefore, all you're trusting is the quality of the code. So moving towards a model in which the DevOps, the security operations, that a bunch of that stuff belongs to somebody else was a huge deal 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we're living through the consequence of companies were first overly careful. And now I think people are kind of nonchalant about the idea of like, I can use the SaaS product and not really understanding what data is stored there, what risk is there, what possible risk is there from this cloud product.
Yeah, and
movement into other systems.
And there's different levels of trust as well, right? So you can say you trust that the service works the way it works, and that's and you heard a lot about repatriating kind of stories about companies moving into the cloud too fast and this doesn't really work as advertised. I'm going to go back, but you're specifically talking about the trust as relating to the security and to the maybe to the well-being of organizations, right?
Yeah, and I'm sort of talking about, we're at a security conference. Like the security products, we've moved into, most companies are now in this weird hybrid mode where they still have a significant amount of on-premise infrastructure and they have a bunch of stuff in the cloud. And they're learning that it is not the intersection of vulnerability sets, it is the union, that all of the problems that you always had on-prem still exist. Yeah. And you have these new problems in the cloud, and bad guys are getting very good at taking an advantage that they gain in one place and taking it to the other domain. And so how do you handle trust in that environment is quite complicated. And lots of, every major company has a vendor risk management process.
Yeah.
What I find that to be personally one of the biggest wastes of money that we have kind of in global capitalism, or at least in the security industry, is that a ton of time is spent getting companies to fill out these questionnaires, and they're all kind of the same but different enough that you have to spend a ton of time filling them out. Yeah. And it's rare that the consumers of these products actually sit down and think among themselves, what are we using this thing for, and where is it hooked up, and is this thing an acceptable loss? Right?
Yeah, this really gets into the old compliance kind of discussion, right? So a lot of companies do stuff because they have to, and they don't really think about why something makes sense or why something else doesn't make sense. That's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, and they don't. It's often the vendor risk management process is a one-time thing upon initial acquisition or when you re-sign a contract. Yeah. It's not a continuous idea of, I've got this thing sitting out there that's possibly risky to me.
And it didn't really help very well either, right? Because
it has not helped much. No.
We've seen a lot of third-party software kind of attacks, which ideally you would catch before they.
Well, I don't think it's just there's no realistic process that I'm going to use some kind of product or system that is based upon tens or hundreds of millions of lines of code, and that you filling out some kind of spreadsheet is going to fix any problems. What you need to do is you just need to be thoughtful about what the product is being used for, and then planning for it to be a reasonable sacrifice, right? That like if you can't 100% trust a product, and nothing you really can, then you really need to limit what the risk is to the rest of the organization, and then be very careful about applying the controls you put in place to specifically match this thing that you're using of what possible impact it has.
So how do you do that then? If you don't fill out tons of vendor risk forms, how should an organization tackle this? Let's start with it.
I mean, doing the forms are fine. I wish people would move to there are a couple of standards out there. It would be way better if you had standards that were applied to. From my perspective, I mean, part of where we're moving in cloud services, including security services like the ones that products that SentinelOne provides, is we have to provide the transparency to customers that they can trust but verify, right? Yeah. That they have their own visibility into what we're doing and what's going on. Yeah. And I think what we're going to see coming out of some of these kind of cloud scandals that I'm sure we're going to talk about, there's going to be a significant push for companies to have a much greater level of transparency into their cloud.
Yeah. So and that goes all the way from the basic infrastructure to everything that they deliver on top of,
that's right.
of the cloud.
Yeah, right. So and I feel like the infrastructure as a service platforms have done this best, right? In that you've got like Amazon CloudTrail, for example. Google's got an equivalent of the ability of getting pretty fine-grained logs into some place that you can ingest them, look for anomalies, use them for instant response and such. Where this is less effective is in the SaaS layer, where you have SaaS products that are only often logging user actions. Of an admin logged in and did this, they did that. Yeah. They're not giving you any visibility into their internal state or changes that they've made. And I think that's a mistake because those logs do exist. They just don't make them customer facing. And I think giving customers some chance of catching intrusion is going to be key. Yeah.
So it's up to the SaaS providers to make sure that customers have access to this. And but then the next step is obviously that customers need to be able to interpret them and make sense of them, right? And that's that's also quite a big ask.
Well, and
I think
a key first step is the plumbing, right? So another thing that I've been talking to a lot of companies about is if you want to play against the level of adversity that most companies are facing today, you have to have all your data in one place. You have to have all your data in one place. It's very fast. And that is the real weakness of a lot of companies, is their security data pipeline is 15 years old, it's 10 years old, it's based upon Splunk, some other product that was built from the spinning disk days. It is not cloud native. There might be a cloud component, but like when you look at it, it's clearly like an on-prem product that's been shoved into the cloud. And as a result, it makes it hard to put data in, or if you get the data in, retrieving it is actually quite a slow thing. It's much more of an archive than like a live data store. And so as a result, doing the smart things you want to do, where you have AI looking for anomalies, where you have the ability to do Gen AI created queries, where you have the ability of like, I want to pull 100 million records and create a training set for my AI system. Those things are incredibly hard based on the data platform you're on.
Yeah. And also, I mean, and not to mention those platforms are extremely expensive as well, usually, right? To
actually the joke being that Cisco bought Splunk because it was the cheapest way for them to get a license.
Right? Yeah. That's the. I mean, we are seeing the end of the SIM era, right? I mean, it's more or less overtaken by maybe only for compliance and auditory purposes. You still use it. But for most other purposes, you don't really need it anymore.
I think the modern move is to move into a security data lake, a data lake that has both security-sensitive logs, but perhaps operational logs as well. Yeah. That then you build a SIM layer. SIM is a feature. It is a view. The SIM is a view into the data lake. It is not the thing that's holding the data itself.
No. Right? Because then you're approaching it from the other way around, and that doesn't really work if you do that, right?
Yeah, and so I think SIM functionality is still important, especially for flow control, right? Of I got this alert. It got picked up by this person. It's tied to this ticket, right? And those are the kinds of things that SIM-like functionality is still necessary. But the underlying thing should not be a database that is only used for SIM. You need to have data lakes that you have the ability, again, with like significant, that are based upon modern storage structures that are natively distributed, that have a huge amount of RAM caching, so that you have the ability to do things like do high-speed parallel analysis.
But that's also important. For example, I'm from Europe, so we're going to get the NIS2 kind of thing going on in October, and for that you need to be able to step one is you have to report a breach within 24 hours, and then step two is the reporting duty itself is that you have to provide a full written kind of report within 72 hours.
Right.
And if your infrastructure is slow and you can't really find anything...
Which I just would say it's crazy. Like, there's a ton of breaches that I've worked in which you don't have containment in 72 hours, right? Yeah. Like, if you come into a company and they don't have EDR, they don't have a data lake, they don't have a single pane of glass for their responders, and you keep on asking a question of, like, I need your Palo Alto logs. And I'm like, okay, great. It'll be 6 hours when I go to every single one and pull off the console.
Yeah.
Those companies are not going to have a response in 72 hours. Right?
No.
So I think it is nice that they're being aspirational, but it's also going to be carnage for a bunch of European and multinational companies.
It's one of those very, very ambitious plans that the European Union has, and usually they're drawn up by people.
It always works out great. My understanding is every EU plan has worked out fantastically.
Well, the thing is, one of my pet peeves in that respect is that these things are drawn up by people who don't understand what they're talking about, right?
Shocking.
I saw one of the first versions of the Cyber Resilience Act that they are working on, and they wanted to make upstream developers and open source developers wanted to make them responsible for the security of that code, which is obviously, I mean, that's just not how open source works and how communities work.
No, not if you want people to work for free. You're not going to generate all this liability for them.
The only thing you're going to get is that all the open source development is going to leave the EU. That's basically what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You don't want that. But we're digressing a little bit. But so this trust kind of concept from a SentinelOne perspective, you can actually give that to your customers, so you have full transparency on...
Well, we have transparency. It's something we're continually working on, right? Like, this is actually for, through our security data lake, keep on working on exposing more data and putting... But, like, all of our stuff ends up in the same place as your logs for your own platform. Yeah. So, but, yes, this is something that, is on a kind of a continuous process for us, is giving customers the visibility necessary to understand, because, we are in a critical place. We have to recognize... And many of our customers were running in kernel mode on thousands of machines. Yeah. You have arbitrary execution. Now, you can turn off a bunch of the obvious execution paths, but it's still incredibly sensitive. Even if you turn off the most dangerous functionality, it's still we have incredibly sensitive data.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for us to demonstrate to customers we're doing a good job up front, to fill out their vendor risk questionnaire,
obviously,
to demonstrate. And then if something goes wrong, that we're upfront and honest with them. Yeah. And then, like I said, to allow for trust but verify, to continue to put all of our logs in a place that they have access to them themselves.
It's funny you mentioned the term platform just now. There's quite a big push and a big move towards, especially by the big platforms, to do more and more on their platforms.
Yeah.
Something like Microsoft is an obvious example, but that doesn't always work out very well. I think there are a bit too many holes and vulnerabilities in those platforms.
Yeah,
it's hard to trust a big tech or a platform like Microsoft.
I think there's two questions here. Yeah. There is, do you want your security platform to be the same as your base cloud platform? Which I think the answer, as we've seen from Microsoft, the answer is no.
No.
Right? Like buying a house from somebody and then also buying the fire department when the house is already on fire, paying them extra for the fire department to put out the fire doesn't feel right, but it's also just not a smart move. No. And I think what we've seen through the Microsoft's breach after breach, they had the CSRB report, which is about the Chinese breach last year. Yeah. They have these 8Ks coming out in which it seems like the Russian SVR is still in Microsoft's network. So they are in an active knife fight with the Russians right now, which they have my sympathy. There's a lot of good people who work at Microsoft who I know who are working on this, but it's not their fault personally, but saying this is going to be the company that has all of my identity management, that has all my cloud information, has all my email, and then also the security products that are supposed to be monitoring those things will get from them. Yeah. It means you're buying into the same blind spots. Right? Yeah. We actually saw this with Defender in that there was a privilege escalation bug in Defender that Microsoft marked because of just kind of their model as like a do not fix that was being used in the wild. Right? And that happens all the time. That effectively you do not want the people who make your EDR to be the same people who make Windows, because they will end up making the same do not fix decision, the same blind, they have the same blind spot that then spreads across that. And so I think that's one thing. On platformization and security, I do think there is a natural move towards buying into specific security platforms for a couple reasons. One, just so many people are just tired of the integration hassles, right? Of lots of work has gone into standardized alert formats, standardized log formats, all this, and that's wonderful. It's still kind of a pain to make all your stuff work together. And like our sales engineers spend plenty of time, on these calls with a customer where, it is sales engineer from your SIM and from your EDR manufacturer and your cloud provider all blaming the other one, right? And everybody's trying to act out of good faith, but just it's a naturally challenging thing. The second is I do think, we're moving towards an AI versus AI world, right? In 5 years, vast majority of offense is going to be by AI systems. And so defenders are going to have to be using AI. That you'll have an attacker is going to be supervising a bunch of sub-agents that go scan their victims, find exploits, do the exploitation, do the initial intrusion, do east-west movement, go all the way to the end until they tell a human, I'm all done. And defenders are going to have a master AI system that is then working with sub-AI systems that are watching your logs, watching your networks, watching installs, working on DLP, that then all is into the master system that tells it everything's going okay, or oops, something is going on. I need a human to tell me what to do. But here at least is all the data in a place that you can make a decision in a couple of minutes. It doesn't take you 2 hours of investigation. That is very hard to do unless you have the platform that's all tied together, right? It's just very hard to do the AI work because you need the data, you need the integration. And so I think that the AI push does make a natural push towards platforms being better for security. That being said, I just think it's silly to have the thing you're defending and the defense system to be built by the same people, because again, they have the same blind spots.
On the one hand, I would agree. On the other hand,
Microsoft would be way better shape now if they're using somebody else's EDR. I'll just say it, right? The fact that you can compromise them and you can neutralize both their security protections and their their product protections and the security features at the same time is a huge weakness for them. Any other, most companies, their production systems would not also be their defensive systems. They would have somebody else. Even if
they more or less configured it completely correctly, 100%, it would still not be the wise thing to do.
There's a natural risk to the decisions being made, even in a large company, of having the same kind of mindset that goes into them and trusting the same company for both.
Oh, I mean, there's also something to be said for if you have very close ties with one company that does everything for you, you can also speak about maybe a higher level of trust between because if you really trust Microsoft or someone else.
Great. So Microsoft's biggest customer is probably the U.S. government, and they clearly don't trust them anymore, right? What the CSRB report showed is that Microsoft was lying to people. They told people they'd figured out the Chinese breach. They then went back and we made a mistake. Okay, people make mistakes. I've been parts of incident response where the initial communication turns out not to be correct. Microsoft decided not to correct it until CSRB confronted them and made them do it. Yeah. So, yes, you can have a long-term relationship with a company, but Microsoft basically was lying to the U.S. government. They're lying to their customers until the U.S. government uncovered it. Yeah. So, from my perspective, that is not a company you can trust.
Yeah. Now, you had, and quite recently, you had the MITRE kind of thing going on. That was also very weird. The company that, because they are also very, very, very close with the U.S. government as well, right? And helping them with all their with the DoD and all sorts of other departments.
Yeah.
So and they obviously do the attack framework. So.
MITRE's a very important company for sure. Yeah, they do a lot of defense work.
Yeah, and they didn't really have their security in order as well.
Yeah, they also had a problem. I think for all of these folks, the transparency is critical. Now, in that case, we're talking about a government contractor that is almost uniquely a government contractor. If they're turning stuff over on the high side to the government or via their contracting mechanisms, then that seems reasonable. It's for a company like a Microsoft or Amazon or Google, if they have a breach, everybody in the planet relies upon them. Those three companies in particular are critical infrastructure for every human being. They have all of our, every single one of us. There's no way to opt out. There's so many products that run on them. And so, for the major hyperscale cloud providers, I think they have a challenge of they have to be transparent with everybody because there's nobody who's effectively not their customer, even if they don't have a direct financial relationship.
Yeah. And going back to the to the AI part, right? So, is that the biggest threat on trust as well? So, in the big picture.
Yeah, I would say AI is causing complexity for a couple of different areas of trust.
AI and trust are very, very closely related as well, right? So you need to trust. You also need to trust the AI that you're using to combat the other AI that's attacking you, right?
Yeah, and it's hard because there's such complex, effectively, I mean, technically a lot of them are deterministic, but they don't feel that way. Like some of them are deterministic, some aren't. But like predicting what they're going to do is quite hard, right? Like, which is the whole point is what makes them feel magical is you don't know exactly what they're going to do, right? Like it's not a computer program that you say, if I do these 3 things, it will do the 4th. And so that's incredible, but it also makes it harder to trust these systems because they are beyond human understanding. And I think if anybody, we're here at RSA, and there's a lot of companies down there at the floor that are basically saying we will solve your AI risk problems for you. And if they say that like that with any kind of confidence, they're lying to you, really. In that we don't know what AI risk problems are right now.
No.
Like it is the very early days of the fundamental research happening in these systems about how do you manipulate them, how do you attack them. That to me, it's like the 90s in web apps. Like if somebody said, I can build you the world's most secure web app in 1998, that meant nothing because a bunch of the attacks that ended up being big deals for web applications weren't invented yet, right? And that's where we are with AI. Like we'll look back in 2030 and be like, oh my God, we are so silly to think you'd build a quote-unquote secure AI system in 2024.
But on the other hand, I think it's quite a well-known fact that lots of attackers and lots of the organization behind all the attackers, they usually have all they have the SentinelOne EDR, they have all the stuff, and they're trying to find the loopholes in there.
Right.
But if you're using an AI which is not deterministic, or at least you can't really predict what it's going to do, then that would actually help the defenders, right?
Right,
well.
and that's how we use AI. I mean, SentinelOne's used AI since the beginning of the company, like 12 years ago. Not generative AI, but AI for detection. Specifically, the theory of instead of doing signature-based detection, since there's an infinite number of binaries that can do something bad, there's a finite number of choke points on an operating system in which malicious behaviors are found, right? Like you want to hook the keyboard, there's 7 ways to do it, and you have to do one of those 7 ways. You want to get screen share, you want to call PowerShell. And so those are if you have those choke points, then having the telemetry data and then have something in the cloud that is AI based that is watching it, you're right, does provide like a much less deterministic view for the attacker. This is one of the classic problems with AV is the attackers, like you said, will just buy these products. Like I remember the FireEye on-prem devices. Remember they had like on-prem, here's an appliance, which is kind of like the first kind of advanced malware product. And their success was also their biggest weakness. And that there was probably a dozen of those racked and stacked in Beijing and Moscow. You would be crazy to be a APT to have a piece of malware that'd be caught by FireEye's device because you could buy them. And so this is, I think, a core part of the SentinelOne feature set is the fact that a bunch of the AI happens is being updated continuously in the cloud. Means that if you do something, even if it's not caught initially, you're running a significant risk of being caught eventually as the AI gets smarter and smarter and eventually goes back and sees, oh, this anomaly happened.
But then you're also talking about maybe a different definition of trust in the sense, what should you trust, right? And maybe it's not about, because trust, transparency, all these things are also quite closely related when it comes to AI. Maybe it's not about trusting the complete transparency of or the transparent kind of display of how the AI works, but maybe trusting that AI is a better way of defending yourselves against the attackers. Then
it's trust. It's like trust in another human. You don't actually know if another human being, it could be your spouse, they could be your long-term friend. You really don't know what they're going to do when the chips are down. No. So that is the funny thing about AI is you do have not to anthropomorphize it too much, but you do have to treat it a little bit like a person. Of like, it's not like a computer program where you can expect what's going to happen. No. You're hoping it does a good job.
So you base your trust on perceived outcomes, I would imagine. So
perceived outcomes, testing, right? Like I think for all of these AI systems, I'm always a huge fan of purple teaming, right? Like red teams with intentional, blue team review and very thoughtful, review of the entire kill chain is a critical part of security. And I think it's a critical part of testing AI systems is doing realistic red teams and seeing what the result is. And none of the products will catch every single one, but if you go through all of the steps in a kill chain and it gets caught at some point there, then like you can't trust that it's 100%, but at least it's going to be marginally useful.
Yeah. And we also know now why the purple is the color for a SentinelOne, maybe?
Oh, I had nothing to do with that. I don't think it's the.
Well, because the new AI kind of thing is called Purple AI. So
it is called Purple AI.
Maybe it's based on that. I don't know.
I am sure we spent $1 gazillion on somebody to tell us exactly which Pantone purple we should be using to have people trust us. Not my area.
No, not mine either. But so, what's the next? Just to get near the end of the episode, what's the next thing that you see happening in terms of trust combined with AI, and where does this go? Because you mentioned we don't know what what's going to be like in 2028, in 2030, whatever. How can you work on on this topic if you don't really know where it's going?
I think what's going to happen with AI is it's going to revolutionize different areas of security. And in each case, the defenders will have an initial advantage that will be decreased by attacker ingenuity, right? So right now, a lot of the AI focuses on operations. It's on making your SOC analysts faster, finding better alerts, finding malicious stuff, speeding up response. And defenders have a huge advantage in that we have products like SentinelOne that are using AI. That offensive people are generally not using AI for actual attack coordination, but they will get there. Mm-hmm. And so, defenders are first because we've spent billions of dollars in R&D collectively, and thousands of people have been working on it. But the attackers, as the open source models come out, as the basic things that they can then modify come out, the foundational models, then they're going to start to catch up, and we're going to start to see. I expect cyber extortion actors, financially motivated actors, will start using AI to automate parts of the kill chain that so far have been very manual and a very person-heavy process.
No.
Next, I think is application security. So a number of companies are doing smart things around using AI to look over your shoulder as a developer, kind of co-pilot models of, it looks like you're doing something crazy. No, we've had SAS, we've had stack analysis, dynamic analysis, fuzzing, but often those systems lack kind of the bigger picture context, and I think LMs gives us an interesting option of training it, and this is all the other things happening at a company. These are all the other systems you're interacting with, and then it can make an intelligent decision of, I think you're doing something stupid. But then defender, so that's defense advantage because there's companies spending hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital on that. But then the attackers will come behind and will be able to drop binaries into AI systems that will find vulnerabilities and write shell code automatically.
Yeah, but you will only know what to do next when those defenders have caught up. Or the attackers have caught up.
Yeah,
with the
I think
defender.
so.
That's when you know what you have to do.
And then I think the real final attack mode is the fully automated malware, no command and control, right? So like a piece of malware that's smart enough that runs inference locally, which is, this will be interesting to see, is like, they just announced a new iPad today that has more AI knowledge, and like iPad, you don't get a lot of malware on it, but it'll be interesting to see as chips have neural engines built in, as like, more GPU power and servers and such, whether or not people build malware that actually does inference using the local AI hardware. But I think it's quite possible, we've seen a lot of good research is even, with quantization work and such, you can run this stuff on CPUs. What I'm really afraid of is a totally smart Stuxnet, right? That Stuxnet cost probably $50 million to, it is rumored, the American and Israeli taxpayers. Mm-hmm. And it was based upon all this human intelligence and how the Iranian nuclear plant worked. Yeah. If you could build a piece of malware that doesn't need that intelligence, that doesn't need a command and control mechanism, and that AI makes an intelligent decision of how to do east-west movement until it causes as much damage as possible, that could be an extremely dangerous weapon. Yeah. That I think would be first from the financially motivated actors, because it would be so dangerous that states would not use it unless you had a real shooting war.
But that would also imply that we're moving towards a fully automated defense.
That's the only way you can protect against that.
Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to protect yourself.
You just would be too slow. Yeah. So I think you'll need fully automated defense to see, okay, there's this piece of software that's moving its way through my network. I don't have it in any of my signatures, but I recognize the behavior is malicious. I will intentionally isolate every machine it's touched and do a bunch of work, change a bunch of accounts, rotate a bunch of passwords, shut, microsegment a bunch of networks, and then tell my humans, hey, I fixed this for you. Yeah.
But then, then you get into the early cloud kind of mindset again, right? Probably a lot of, especially in financial industries, where they don't want to be.
Oh, it's gonna be scary.
It's gonna be scary.
It's gonna be scary to give operational control to AI, but it's gonna have to happen. And I think that's gonna be a fascinating part of the next couple of years. Is how do you build guardrails around the AI operates in a mechanism that I feel, just like with a tier 1 SOC analyst. Tier 1 SOC analysts are not allowed to reset the password of the CEO. They shouldn't be, right? They're not allowed to pull the plug on an entire data center. When I was at Facebook, we had very specific for tier 1, tier 2, and then for like the executives who were running an incident, like of an incident of a certain level, you'd have an executive incident manager. Yeah. They had the power up to basically shutting down a data center, right? Yeah. But not all of Facebook. You'd have to go to Zuck for that. So figuring out like what are the limits of each tier of AI and what can it do without human intervention is going to be this terrifying direction.
It's going to be very, very interesting to watch in the next couple of years.
But and I think what will happen is because the downside risk is so high, we're going to have really smart malware. We're going to have some really disruptive attacks that are well beyond.
It needs to hurt first, and then
it needs to hurt, and then companies will say, okay, well, the risk of this AI shutting us down and losing us money is better than the possibility of another piece of smart malware.
So in that sense, it hasn't. It's not going to change much in how the security world works in general.
Well,
right?
I think
it's always been the case.
I think we'll have all this AI, but you're going to have human in the loop. Yeah. My guess. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. But I think we'll have human in the loop in a lot of loops until companies are afraid enough that they're willing to give AI the ability to shut down thousands of machines. Yeah.
All right. It's going to be interesting to watch. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Nice conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of TechZine Talks on Tour. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. If you'd like more information, please feel free to visit techzine.eu, where we cover everything, everywhere. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again on the next episode of TechZine Talks on Tour.